She'd lived alone on the property for such a long time, nearly 10 months and counting, that she'd almost forgotten the place wasn't hers. Weddings are nice.
It's for our daughter, Dana. She's all we have. Dana and, of course, Jonas.
Of course. Annie's mind echoed with a twinge of disdain. Then she realized that Roger's remark must mean that Jonas was Dana's son. Annie had seen the woman flit by the cottage once or twice, but was surprised she was old enough to have a child out of college. The master's program at the Art Institute of Chicago, she corrected herself. Well, don't worry about disturbing me. I grew up in Boston. I'm accustomed to living with noise. Besides, she expected that any sign of protest would be pointless. He tipped his Tilly hat and shuffled away in his Tevas. Closing the door, she slumped against it and said, "Damn!" She loved the little cottage. She loved Chappie, where she'd landed when she'd traded city life for the peaceful island. She'd made friends, connections with people she now cared about and who cared about her. She didn't want to be forced to leave. "Damn," she said again. At age 51, a fact she found startling, Annie had lived long enough to know not to envy anyone who had a life of privilege. As a writer, she knew that every individual, every family, had a story, often a dark one, an underbelly, her old college pal and best friend Murphy used to call it, and that having buku bucks, Murphy again, was no guarantee of happiness. "But money helps when you need a place to live," she said out loud now. Then she did what she did best in times of stress. She put on the kettle for tea. While waiting for the water to boil, she plunked down on the rocking chair and stared at the wall. Or rather, she stared at the bookcases that stood against the wall. The ones she'd bought when she'd moved in, then packed with her favorite volumes. Along with the corner desk, the bookcases fit perfectly into the snug space and created an inspiring nook where she'd finally been able to settle in and conquer her writer's block. Where would her things fit now? She was almost finished with her latest novel, Renaissance Heist, a museum girl's mystery. But with less than a month until her publisher's deadline, she needed time to focus. How the heck could she do that if she had to hunt for a place to live and then actually move? Should she simply shove everything but her laptop, her thesaurus, and a suitcase of clothes into storage? She'd blow her budget if she could find a quiet single room, shared bath, kitchen privileges, at an exorbitant summer rental rate, but at least she'd be able to get the book done. Then, come September, she could begin a realistic housing search. It was a lousy plan, but it was the only one she could come up with at the moment. Her priority, after all, had to be Renaissance Heist, as her editor, Trish, often reminded her. Aside from the deadline that was designated in indelible ink in her contract, Annie had been counting on book sales to replenish her savings, now that she'd finally paid off the huge debt her former husband had bequeathed her when he'd disappeared. But how could she be creative with this new crisis dismantling her thoughts? "Damn," she said for the third self-pitying time. She hated that at her age she needed to worry about how and where she would live. Mostly, she hated that her idyllic dream-come-true world was about to come crashing down. She gazed out the window. The view from the cottage was of the scrub oaks, not the water. Ocean views were reserved for the Flanagans of the world, the haves in a world of have-nots like Annie. Unless she got really lucky, really fast. The kettle whistled.